Well, hello friends and welcome. As you guys know, my software of choice in digital painting has been and still is Procreate, and because I get a lot of questions about its features and tools and stuff like that, I decided to make a whole video dedicated to explaining some general useful tips of the app, as well as share my own workflow with layers and all that fun stuff. Oh, and by the way, before I get into it, this is only available on iPads, so if you don't have one, there's no other way of using it, unfortunately. I mean, it is also available on iPhones. I guess it's called PROCREATE Pocket or something like that, but most artists use it on iPads because it's more comfortable that way. Also, I don't know how the Pocket version looks, so I have no idea if the tips I'm gonna give today can be applied to that version as well. So yeah, there's that. Now let's get started. So the first thing you're gonna need when you open Procreate is a canvas, and to create one you just have to tap on this plus button right here. You will see that you have most of these canvases too, because some of them are Procreate's default canvases and the other ones are made by me. Now this is very important, so please don't skip this step. When you're creating a new canvas, it's important to set the correct pixel size, because if you don't, your drawings will look very pixelated and blurry. So let's create a new canvas just to give you an example. So to create a new one, just tap this icon right here and this is what you'll see. We'll set this canvas to 400 by 500 pixels and let's see what it looks like. As you can see, the brush strokes are very pixelated and have very low quality. And like, imagine if you had to zoom in and work on a detailed piece. The quality would be really bad, and we don't want that. We want our paintings to be nice and clear, and the way to achieve that is by setting a higher pixel rate. So I'm just gonna delete this canvas by swiping left on it, and I'll go back to the canvas panel. Now my canvas of choice is this one, and I've set it on roughly 3000 by 4000 pixels, and I don't recommend going below 3000 pixels. I personally think that's the minimum needed in order to have good quality drawings. So set yours to at least 3000 pixels and you're good to go. I set mine to these specific numbers because I use this canvas for Instagram specifically, and this is the size I need to post in order to not have my painting cropped by Instagram or anything like that. But obviously if you work on bigger projects, set yours to whatever fits your needs. This is just my personal preference. A good thing to keep in mind though in Procreate is that the bigger you set your canvas size to, the lower the maximum layers number is gonna be. So as you can see here, I'm only allowed to use 36 layers, but that's fine for me personally because I never actually reached that number yet, like not even close. So it doesn't bother me at all, but if you're someone that needs a lot of layers, maybe set your canvas to a lower pixel size, or just duplicate your project to a separate canvas as many times as you need. Now the other custom canvas is one that I've created a long time ago, and it basically has the same purpose as the first one, but it's a little bit lower in pixel size and therefore has more layers available. But as you can see, I've only used the first canvas size because I ended up not needing the extra layers after all. Okay, now I'm just gonna tap on this canvas right here that I've created a few moments ago to show you some more useful tips. So if you're into digital art, you might have noticed a lot of artists have a matte screen protector on their tablets, and that's because drawing on a glass surface feels really weird and unnatural. So that's also why, for example, display tablets already have that matte finish when you get them. Now it's not gonna feel exactly like drawing on paper, but it does help a lot, so I definitely recommend getting one. If you already have one, I think you should really consider changing the pressure sensitivity as soon as you get Procreate. And if you don't have a screen protector at all, you can still do this, but maybe don't change it as much. So if you go to settings, preferences, and then select pressure and smoothing, you will probably have yours by default as a straight line. And what I recommend to do is grab the line from the middle and bring it up like this. This will not only improve how your brushes respond, but it will also make your Apple Pencil tip last longer because you won't need to press as hard anymore. I saw a video about this a few years ago and it completely changed the way I use brushes. And for example, if you ever get Procreate brushes from other creators and wonder why it looks like some brushes behave differently when they use them compared to when you use them, this is probably why. Because pressure sensitivity plays a big role in how brushes behave. However, if you're still having troubles with the opacity of the brushes even after changing the pressure sensitivity, there's another setting you can play around with to fit your workflow. Let's say, for example, you got one of my brush sets and you want to use the sketch brush. And when I use it, it looks like this, but when you try to use it, it looks nothing like it. Or maybe it just doesn't work like you thought it would and simply want to change it a little bit. That's fine. You can easily adjust the opacity of the brush by just tapping on it and then go to properties. Here you'll be seeing this brush behavior section where you can play around with the maximum opacity setting. I like to keep mine at 65% for this specific brush, but if you want to press even lighter on your Apple Pencil while still having a solid brush stroke, you can set this one to the max to obtain that. Now the next few minutes are gonna be especially helpful for those of you who just got Procreate and wanna know some useful quick gestures. But for those of you who already got Procreate for quite some time, you probably already know this, so feel free to skip this part. Everything is timestamped below, so you can just easily skip to wherever you need to. With that being said, let's start with layers. Layers are extremely intuitive and easy to use, but just in case you've never seen them before, here are some gestures I use all the time. So this is where you have the layers. You can add more by tapping the plus button, and you can duplicate, lock, or delete if you swipe left on the layer. If you tap on it, you'll see a bunch of options appear, and if you tap on the letter N, you will get all the layer modes. I honestly use like 4 layer modes out of all of these, but feel free to experiment and see what you like best. Okay, let me just duplicate this layer a bunch of times real quick to show you some other stuff. Alright, so let's continue with how to select multiple layers. You simply tap on one layer and then swipe to the right on any other layers you want to select. You can then group them, move them, liquefy them, and so on. And the same goes with deselecting. Just swipe right on any of them and that's it. You can also merge all the selected layers by pinching them together, and if you double tap to undo right after, they will come back. And I think that's pretty much all you need to know about layers if you're just starting out. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now let's get into hand gestures. If you're freaking out because there are so many quick gestures in Procreate, don't worry about it, just give it a little bit of time and your muscle memory will do the rest. Okay, so the most useful quick gestures you're gonna need are undo and redo. Basically, if you're drawing something and don't like the outcome of your last brush strokes, simply tap with 2 fingers to undo and 3 fingers to redo. So undo, 2 fingers, redo, 3 fingers. If you tap multiple times, it will just keep on doing your last brush strokes up to like 200 times or something like that. And if you hold down those 2 fingers, it will undo your strokes at a faster pace. And the same goes with redo. Moving on to the next gesture, if you swipe down with 3 fingers, the copy and paste menu will appear. And what I use the most out of this menu is the cut and paste option. So let's say I want to move the eyes of the smiley face to another layer. I'll simply tap on the selection tool, select the eyes, and then swipe down with 3 fingers and tap on cut and paste. I find this extremely useful whenever I draw on the wrong layer, for example, and that happens a lot. So in that case, I can simply move everything on the layer I was supposed to draw on in the first place. The next one is tapping with 4 fingers. This will open the quick menu, which I've never used to be honest, but I've seen a lot of artists do use it, so I thought I'd mention it. And because I don't use it, I have like random settings to each option. Like you can see here, I have new layer, copy, flip horizontally, but you can actually change these to whatever you'd like. And the way you do that is by holding on any option of the quick menu, and a bunch of other options will pop up to choose from. And the reason I don't use it is because I honestly think every option is already quite easy to access, and I guess I just never felt the need to have a quick menu. You can also change the gesture of it. Like I have the 4 finger tap set by default, but if you go to gesture control, you'll find a bunch of other gestures available to choose from. Next we have pinching with 2 fingers. So let's say you are zoomed in and wanna quickly check the composition of the whole canvas. All you have to do is pinch with 2 fingers and there you have it. Pretty simple and quick. The next one is color picking. There are a lot of ways to color pick in Procreate, but I'll just show you how I usually do it. So one way to do it is by holding down 1 finger until the color picker appears, and then you can choose whatever color you want to pick. And another easy way to do it is by tapping on this little square right here and then select the color with your Apple Pencil. This one is much faster, I think, because you don't have to wait for the color picker to appear. You just kinda quickly tap the square and immediately are able to select the color. I'm already used to the time it takes for the color picker to appear, but if you find it slow, you can actually change the time if you go to gesture control once again, tap on eyedropper and change the delay rate right here. As you can see, there are a lot of gestures available for color picking, but I only use the 2 I've mentioned before. Another quick gesture would be holding on this color right here to change between your current color and the previous one. It's a very neat option and I use it all the time. It's a real time saver. If you just tap on it, you'll see a lot of color options. I personally like to use the square gradient because I like to have the whole color range. There's also a hue bar and a saturation and light bar, so you basically have everything you need right here. But there's also this disc-shaped option where you can zoom in and have the whole range of color as well. But if you do zoom in, you won't see the other colors anymore, so I still prefer the square. You also have harmony and values, but these are a little bit more advanced and I honestly never use them. And lastly, the color palettes. Here we have a bunch of default palettes, but you can also create your own and save it, which is really nice because then you can easily access the most used colors at all times. I also created my own and set it as default, and I really do use it from time to time, so that's pretty cool. So now that we got all that out of the way, let's move on to some general tips for your actual drawings. Side note, even though this is a beginner-friendly video, I won't be getting into all of Procreate's options. There are a lot of videos on YouTube about all of its features, so I encourage you to check those out, as I will only mention the features I personally think are the most relevant and useful and that I use the most. The first feature I recommend using religiously is the horizontal flip. I've said this many times before, but flipping your canvas is extremely important in order to find potential mistakes in your drawing. When you look at your drawing for a long period of time, your eyes are starting to get used to it and essentially ignore the mistakes. Flipping the canvas will give you a fresh look on your piece, so use it as much as you can, especially in the sketch phase. The next feature goes hand in hand with the previous one, and that's the reference window. You can set your existing canvas as reference, import a photo from your gallery, or even take a picture. But most of the time I use it to see my canvas because I tend to get lost into details, and this little window helps me out with not zooming in and out so much. Many times we might work on a teeny tiny detail that won't even be seen if we zoom out, so checking the reference window will help you decide what details are actually worth working on. You can also move it around as well as resize it however you want. Another useful tool is the transform tool. You can use it to move your subject around, and if you have the snapping option on, you will get these useful guidelines that will help you place your subject perfectly in the middle, for example. I think this is especially useful if you're making a sticker sheet or something like that and you need everything to be perfectly aligned. Okay, let me just duplicate this layer a bunch of times so I can show you. So you can just tap on the layer you need to move around, select the transform tool, and it will help you perfectly align all of them. Here we have a bunch of options for the transform tool, starting with freeform. This will let you scale your subject, but it will also mess with its proportions, so be careful with that. The uniform option will let you scale your subject while also keeping the aspect ratio intact, so that is my go-to most of the time. The distort option is very helpful if you want to put your subject into perspective, and I actually use this a lot for my backgrounds. Whenever I need to draw cars or cities, I just draw a bunch of squares and shapes and distort them to put them into perspective. And it really does make the job easier, so I really recommend it. And the last option is warp, which I honestly never used, but it basically gives you this mesh thingy that gives you even more control to distort your image. I guess another cool feature is that you can actually draw perfect shapes in Procreate. So for example, if you want to draw a perfect circle, all you need to do is hold the pencil a little bit and you'll get this edit shape button. If you tap on it, you'll see a few shape recommendations right away. Select the shape you want and then tap anywhere on the screen to get rid of the selection. And the same goes with various shapes like squares, rectangles, triangles, as well as just simple straight lines. You can also drag and drop the color to fill in a shape like this, but be careful to have all the lines of your shape connected, otherwise it will fill in your whole canvas like this. For other types of shapes like, I don't know, let's draw something random. So for other types of shapes, if you want to drag and drop the color, you might get this weird outline depending on your brush texture, but luckily there's a way to get rid of that. All you have to do is drag your color and hold your Apple Pencil down. Don't let go yet. Then you'll see this blue bar at the top that you can actually control if you slide your pencil to the left or to the right. If you slide far enough to the right, your whole shape will be filled and the outline will disappear. Another way to fill in shapes effectively is by using the selection tool. So besides moving things around with this thing, you can also create shapes and color them in. The way you do that is by selecting freehand and then simply draw the shape you want to color in. If you want to fill in multiple shapes like I want to do in this example right here, you have to close the selection and start another one. To close the selection, you can either tap on freehand again or simply tap on this gray dot. And you can do this as many times as you need. After you've finished drawing your selection, simply tap on color fill and that's it. You have your shapes filled. But a good tip I have with the selection tool is for when you actually use textured brushes and need to color the shapes in the same way. The previous technique won't work anymore because you will have harsh edges and it will look a little bit weird combined with the texture of the brush. So what we're gonna do instead is after we're done with our selection, we're gonna set the feather option to about 3%. It depends on your texture and shape, but for me, it's always around 3 to 4%. After that, we can simply drag and drop the color as usual and you'll have your shapes perfectly and smoothly colored in without any hard edges. Okay, so now that we got all the basic but useful features out of the way, let's get into my workflow regarding layers. And as I explain my process to you guys, I will also share some other useful features based on specific layers if I can remember any of them. Just a heads up though, depending on the illustration, I will have a different number of layers each time, so this is generally how I use them, but they will naturally differ from one illustration to another. So I have everything named so it's easier for you guys to follow, but I honestly don't name them, otherwise I don't use that many layers. Also, obviously, this layer arrangement you see right here is a result of a finished painting, so I do start with a sketch like a normal human being and then add color and details. But this is just how it looks at the very end of the painting. So I'll start with the sketch layers, and yes, I use multiple sketch layers because I want to make my life easier in case I change my mind about the hairstyle or things like that, which happens a lot to be honest. So in this specific illustration, I have a layer for her body, one for hands, and one for hair. But here I combined the hands with the background sketch because they don't interact with each other, so I can still easily move them around while having them on the same layer. I hope that makes sense. And again, the reason for having multiple sketch layers is that sometimes I just might draw the hands too big or too small, which happens a lot again, and I want to be able to resize them easily, you know? Same with the hair, I liquefy it a bunch of times until I like the shape, so it comes in really handy to have it on a separate layer. Now, usually after I'm satisfied with the sketches, I merge them together, but for the sake of explaining my process to you guys, I kept them separate this time. And the cool thing you can do is if you tap and hold on this little checkbox of the layer, all other layers will disappear and you will only see that specific layer. Now my sketch looks a little bit crazy, I know, but that's because I usually alpha lock it like this and I change the color of some parts of the sketch, like on her face right here. And the reason I do that is because I keep my sketch in the final illustration, so even though I paint over some parts of the sketch, a big part of it will actually still be visible at the very end. And yeah, you can tap and hold again on the checkbox to bring all the layers back. The next layers will be the base colors. In this case, we have 3 base layers: skin, hair, and clothes. And the base layers always differ because if I have multiple objects or accessories or stuff like that overlaying, I will make a base layer for every extra object. And that's especially useful when doing commissions, for example, because you want to have that possibility of changing the colors of each layer in case your client wants something different, you know? The next layers are gonna be clipping masks, and the way you create one is by creating a new layer above the one you want to clip it to. Tap on it and you'll see the clipping mask option. Now, the reason I use clipping masks instead of just alpha locking the skin layer is even though both will do the same thing, which essentially is not letting you paint outside of the layer, the difference is a clipping mask will not affect your base layer. It will just be attached to it. And if you just alpha lock your base layer, you won't be able to adjust the shadows or whatever you need to without affecting the whole layer. And what I do most of the time is I go to curves after I've painting the shadows, for example, and I tweak them a little bit. Sometimes I make them darker, other times I change the hue a little bit. And that's something I couldn't do with alpha lock because, like I've said before, it would affect the whole skin layer. So this is why I actually have multiple clipping masks. In this case, I just have one for skin rendering and another one for highlights. And I'm pretty sure I had one for the blush as well at some point, but I probably already combined it with the skin rendering. But yeah, if I want to tweak the highlights, for example, make them lighter or change the hue, I can easily do that thanks to the clipping mask. And listen, please don't take it like, I don't know how to put this. Like, don't feel intimidated by my number of layers, please. I know a bunch of artists that use just one layer and that's it for the whole illustration, okay? This is just my personal workflow and I need my layers because I'm very indecisive and I usually change the colors a lot from beginning to end. And layers help me do that. But you should definitely find your own workflow and don't stress about it, alright? Alright, moving on. Next we have the background layer. So I didn't know where should I mention this one because sometimes I do the background first and the character after, and other times I do it at the very end, so I don't have a specific preference for this one, but this time I did it first because it was really easy to do, just a bunch of simple shapes, so there's that. And next we have the paint over layer, and this one goes on top of everything we've seen so far. The reason I have this on top of everything is that it's easier to clean up some parts of the sketch and also draw some details without messing up the layers underneath. So yeah, yet another safety net. And if I'm doing commissions, I will have two paint over layers at this point, one for the body and one for the hair because it's easier to modify. But because this illustration was mine, I just kept everything on one layer. Next up we have the undertones, meaning the purple and yellow colors you see on her skin. This one is very important for me to be on a separate layer because I changed it a bunch of times to match the colors of the whole illustration. And I think this is actually the layer I changed the most throughout the painting, so yeah, very helpful to have it separately. The next layer is for freckles and it is also set on multiply at 55%. So if I set this on normal, it will look something like this. But I like to use multiply for freckles because it allows them to have a different opacity and color based on what's underneath. So for example, here, the freckles are a lot darker than here on this highlight spot where you can barely see them. It's a small detail, I know, but I just like how it looks. The next one is for lashes and eyebrows, and I don't have a very interesting explanation for why these need a separate layer, but every time I draw the lashes, I also liquefy them to fit the eye better, so I guess that's the reason. Next up is extra shadows set on multiply. As you can see here, I only used it a little bit on her skin and eyes, and I use this layer mode every time I want to add some quick shadows without affecting the brushstrokes underneath. It's a very easy and fast way to add shadows, so I really recommend it. And I also have it on 60% opacity because it was a bit too strong for my liking and I didn't want it to be so aggressive. Like, look at the difference. And finally, we have the tattoos on another layer and my watermark set on multiply at around 70% opacity. And there you have it. Those are all my layers and the layer modes I use the most. But I just want to add something real quick here because someone wrote me a few days ago saying my highlights look very subtle and natural, and that got me thinking about a video I did in the past that is actually no longer accurate for the way I do highlights now. So the way I used to do it is I drew highlights like I normally would and then set the layer to add. Now of course this looks crazy, but I would always set the opacity a bit lower, something like this. However, after a while I noticed I kinda got carried away with the highlights and they were stealing the attention from the character because they were so strong. So I decided to stop using the add layer mode and learn how to better use the colors instead. And I think it looks much better now, like you can still see them clearly, so I only use it for glowing stuff now. So yeah, be careful with the layer modes guys, don't overdo it. Okay, so I actually have a few more steps to do before posting the illustration, so let me walk you guys through it. First things first, I save it as a PNG and then reopen it in Procreate. So as you can see, it's just one layer and it's our drawing. And this is the part where I check if everything's okay. I take another look, flip it horizontally, liquify anything that looks weird, just making sure everything looks alright. Sometimes I play around with the hue, saturation, and brightness just to, try out a bunch of different color variations. And the same goes with curves. I'm just trying out stuff in case I like something better. Like maybe I want to make it more pink or blue or yellow, just whatever color fits. And here, because I had a little bit of background, I wanted to use the Gaussian blur. So I've selected the pencil option, swiped left to lower the strength, and just used the hard brush to add a little bit of blur to the background. And this way the character will stand out a little bit more. You can still slide afterwards to change the strength of the blur, but I set it to about 30% so we could still see her little friend in the background. Now hands down, this is the most important tool I use in Procreate of all times, and that's the liquify tool. Every time I flip horizontally and see something that looks weird, I just take the liquify tool and fix it. And it has a lot of cool options too, like let's say I want to make her eyes bigger. Obviously, it would be too late and complicated to start all over again, so a quick fix for that is the expand option of the liquify tool. Just be careful though with how much you're gonna use it, we don't want to overdo it, okay? It's a very useful tool. You can fix a lot of mistakes with it and move things around easily, so I definitely recommend it. Just keep in mind that if you stretch the image a lot, the pixels are gonna suffer a little bit, because that's what happens essentially. You basically move pixels around, so the quality might drop a little bit if you're using it a lot, so be careful with that. Okay, there's also perspective blur. This is another cool effect you can add to your drawings. I prefer the Gaussian blur, but this one's pretty nice too depending on how you use it. One adjustment I use all the time, and I mean absolutely each time I finish a drawing, is the sharpen adjustment. I don't think I need to explain what this does because the name says it all, but just look at how much sharper and cleaner the brushstrokes get if you use it. I just love it, it's my favorite. So as you can see here, there are a lot of cool adjustments you can use to enhance your illustrations. Chromatic aberration is one of them. I used to use this a lot in the past, but I haven't used it as much lately. No particular reason, I just felt like it. The glitch effect is nice as well. I actually did a black and white piece recently where I used it quite a lot and I really like how it turned out. But again, you'll have to play around with it because there are a lot of options you can choose from. The bloom adjustment is really useful for like glowy objects. So for example, let's say I want to make her silver eye glow. I'll make a new layer and paint over her eye with a little bit of white. Something like that, and then I'll set the layer to add. After that, I'll use Gaussian blur because it looks really sharp and aggressive right now and we need to tone it down. It already looks pretty good, but if you want to add even more glow, just go to bloom and slide to the right to make it even brighter. Now this looks a bit crazy, but there are a lot of scenarios where you might find this adjustment useful, especially if you use like another color, for example. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I use in Procreate. I also add noise to my illustrations, but honestly, I don't like the noise effect Procreate has because I find it a little bit aggressive. I don't know, it's just not like... it looks weird in my opinion, and I don't like any of the options, to be honest. It just looks... I don't know, I don't like it, that's it. I just don't like it, end of story. So what I do instead is I save the illustration as a PNG and then open it in VSCO. And I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, so don't come at me, that's just how I say it. Now, quick disclaimer, I've had this app for many years now, and the grain option was free to use up until last year or so, when they unfortunately decided to make it premium. So you have to pay for it now. Usually I don't pay for stuff like this, but honestly it was really cheap and worth it for me because I've been using it for so long and I kind of got used to it. So yeah, and I really tried like a bunch of different editing apps to find a similar grain effect, including Photoshop and Lightroom, but none of them had the quality of this one. So there's that. I usually set the strength to about 6 and the size to around 2, but that always depends on the illustration, and I've never used the color option. Sometimes I also use their filters. They have some really cool ones, but I don't remember which one was my favorite though. Give me a second. Okay, I think it's this one, but I set the strength really low, like around 3 or something like that. And that's it. I save it and this is the final result. And look how good the quality of the grain is. Like you can still see the sharp brush strokes underneath. You know what I mean? It doesn't affect the image quality like the one in Procreate does, in my opinion. So that's pretty much it for this video. I really hope this helped anyone getting started with Procreate. I know it can be a bit overwhelming when you first get it, but honestly it's super intuitive and easy to use, so just give it some time and you'll be fine. And if you stayed until the end of the video, thank you so much. You're amazing and I appreciate you. And let me know what should we do for when we reach 2,000 subscribers, because we're so close. So leave a suggestion down below if you want to. It will also help me out a lot. And yeah, subscribe if you like to see more videos like these. Take care and I'll see you next time. Bye!